Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 5th of June 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. The curious case of Paranautical Activity. Halo Spartan Assault makes its way to Windows, although it's not what you may have hoped for. Fable HD Remake has been teased by Lionheaded, and we'll be taking a look at the new Indie Royale bundle. All of this and the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Steam Greenlight has certainly not been without its controversies over the last few months. When the system was first launched, it was lauded by some people as a great way to support indie developers and make sure that high-quality indie games actually made their way onto Steam. This was a follow-up to various problems that Steam had had in the past surrounding indie games which had been rejected for no apparent reason. Indeed, Steam was actually very, very bad indeed at telling the indie devs what they'd actually done wrong. They just said, nope, you ain't getting on. This applied to games like, say, Space Pirates and Zombies, which eventually made its way onto Steam, and then Unepic Game, which struggled to get onto Steam for upwards of a year, and was then finally put through the Greenlight system. Even Gabe Newell himself has criticized the system, claiming that it's a bad election process and probably bad for the Steam community in the long run not to move to a different way of thinking about it. Earlier this year, he even said that they came to the conclusion pretty quickly that they could just do away with Greenlight completely because it was a bottleneck rather than a way for people to communicate choice. Now, while some people may herald it as a great way for indies to get on Steam, indie developers seem to see it as anything but, and the latest example of this would be a game by a company called Code Avarice, a two-man team called Paranautical Activity, which is very much a roguelike first-person shooter using a very blocky voxel-based graphics style. The story behind these guys is that they were approached by Adult Swim, who has recently started publishing games for PC. Previously, they only published for iOS, but lately they've actually published games like Super House of Dead Ninjas as well as Super Puzzle Platformer Deluxe. These all made their way onto Steam without too much of a problem. Now, the Code Avarice guys were offered a publishing deal with Adult Swim that said, we will get you onto Steam, and we will be taking 40% of the profits. Now, for the most part, from what I've seen, Adult Swim is held in fairly high regard by indie developers as a company that will actually put a lot of weight and a lot of marketing behind a product. An example would, of course, be Super House of Dead Ninjas, which not only had a gigantic sign outside of PAX East advertising the game, in fact, one of the biggest signs for any game at the event, but also had staff on the floor giving out promotional material. Those guys were actively pushing Super House of Dead Ninjas in a big way, which is more than you would usually see from a lot of publishers when dealing with smaller indie titles. I mean, we are talking about a 2D pixel platformer here. They were willing to push that pretty hard. Now, they got offered this deal, and then the Adult Swim guys went over to Steam, and Valve said, no, we're not letting you do that. And the response was, we don't want to send the message that indies should seek out publishers to get around the Greenlight system. Now, as a direct result, since they haven't been putting any promotion behind their Greenlight, because at that point they assumed, yes, we have a publishing deal, we don't need Greenlight anymore, they're actively struggling to get their Greenlight campaign going again because they need to compete with everybody else that's already miles ahead of them. Now, in a statement to Gama Sutra, Doug Lombardi of Valve said that we review Greenlight votes, reviews, and a variety of factors in the Greenlight process. However, our message to indies regarding publishers is to do it for your own reasons, but do not split your royalties with the publisher expecting an automatic yes on Greenlight. Now, the whole system to me is very, very odd indeed, and that's mostly because it's a massive contradiction. There is no set of standards that appears to be in place here. And for one thing, Adult Swim already put 2 games directly onto Steam without having to go through Greenlight. Yeah, they did that, and that wasn't a problem. But their third game, which is Paranautical Activity, apparently can't go on Greenlight. Why? I have no idea. It almost seems like Valve is trying to set an example, and Paranautical Activity is the unlucky game to get hit with it. This is not the only example of weirdness, though. Wadget Eyes is a company that creates and publishes a variety of rather interesting point-and-click adventure games, which includes Gemini Rue and Resonance. They recently released a game called Primordia. However, for some reason, Despite the fact that they have no less than 6 games already on Steam, they had to go through Greenlight in order to get Primordia onto Steam. As to why that is, no one seems to know. It's a very strange situation indeed. Now, of course, AAA publishers don't seem to have a problem with this, but what if Activision went to Steam and said, yeah, we're going to publish Paranautical Activity? Would they turn around and say no to Activision? Very unlikely. Extremely unlikely, in fact. Just because it happens to be Adult Swim, who are a newer publisher in the PC space, even though they've already successfully published 2 games on Steam, it seems like Valve has turned around and said, nope, not this time. For arbitrary reasons more so than anything else. Now, I fundamentally disagree with their notion. I really, really do. Because it contradicts the very purpose behind Greenlight. Now, here's my logic. So, the statement was, we don't want to send the message that indies should seek out publishers to get around the Greenlight system. Okay, so, for one, it contradicts what they do anyway, right? There are a metric ton of publishers that are already doing just that and continuing to do just that. And I'm not even just talking about the really big ones like EA and Activision either. There are plenty of smaller publishers that are very easily able to get their games onto Steam without any problem whatsoever, and they do not have to go through that Greenlight system. But here's where I feel that their logic really falls down. And the thing is that they are claiming that being on a publisher is not a guaranteed way to get through Greenlight. What's the point of Greenlight? I've got to ask you this, what is the purpose behind Greenlight? Well, it's not a promotional tool, that's for sure. It's actually quite the opposite. Developers are having to sink an inordinate amount of time into promotional campaigns in order to get through Greenlight in the first place, which for a 2-man indie team is a massive drain on resources that should be focused on actually making the game. These are studios so small that they don't have marketing and PR guys. They don't have the funds to do that. They shouldn't be wasting their time trying to promote a Greenlight voting campaign, what is essentially a gigantic popularity contest. The point of Greenlight is to indicate to Valve that the game actually has sufficient interest behind it in order for it to sell. Yeah, that's what they're really trying to do here. Let's not beat around the bush here. This is not some glorious promotional tool to be used by indie developers, as many Valve fanboys seem to twist it. It is not, under any stretch of the imagination, that. It's a completely illogical way to look at it. What it is a system that says, this game will make a decent amount of money for us, so we will take it. It is a way for Valve to, if not eliminate, significantly reduce the risk of bringing a game onto Steam, because they can pretty much guarantee X number of sales. Here's the thing though, if you get a publisher deal, is that not proof that there's already sufficient interest in your game? You're wanting to curate the content. The publisher does exactly that. If a publisher picks a game up, that means they will be pushing it, they will be marketing it, and they believe it is sufficiently profitable for them to do so. So, someone like Adult Swim comes along and says, yes, we believe that Paranautical Activity is going to sell enough copies for this to be worthy of our time. This being only the 3rd PC game that we've picked up. So, it's not like they're picking up every PC game every which way. That's simply not happening. So, you're telling me that Adult Swim's opinion is not important enough to you. You're saying, well, you know what really matters? Votes on Greenlight. Really? So votes on Greenlight is what gets you quality, popular content. Okay, I've got 2 examples of games that have made their way through Greenlight that clearly shouldn't be there. There's no question that there were problems with these games. The first, and it pains me to say this because these guys are my friends and I hate saying this, Yog Ventures. Yog Ventures is a game that barely exists right now. I've played the pre-alphas of it. It's not a thing yet, right? It might end up being good, but this thing was greenlit before there was even anything playable available for it. Why was it greenlit? Because fans. Because it was pushed by a popular personality. In this case, the Yogscast, of course. And then you've got Towns. Now, Towns is a game that was released in a shocking state on Steam. Went through Greenlight. Greenlight, of course, provided 0 quality control whatsoever, and yet Towns made its way onto Steam, was sold for weeks at a time without any warning that this thing was actually an alpha they were selling. I mean, this is probably one of the things that prompted the early access system, and I give all my praise to Valve for actually having that early access system in place now. I think it's very, very important that this kind of thing is available to make sure that, yes, you can try games that are in an earlier state, you can support them, but there are clear warnings as to exactly what they are. Whereas in the town situation, that didn't actually happen for weeks. This was a really nasty situation for a lot of people. They ended up buying a game that just flat out did not work properly. Those are two examples of games that have made it through the greenlight system, but of course there are plenty more. And the weird thing, I would imagine, is that these games that went through greenlight didn't necessarily actually sell a bazillion copies. Of course, all of this is nicely hidden behind Valve's wall, whereby they will not release those kind of statistics, so it's very hard to analyze that. I think what this indicates is that Valve has a very inconsistent policy when it comes to letting games on Steam. And the idea that something like Skyward Collapse didn't have to go through greenlight, for instance, and they don't even have a publisher. Don't get me wrong, I like Arkham games a lot. They put out some really interesting stuff, but don't tell me that the previous Arkham game titles sold a bazillion copies, because I know for a fact that they didn't. I mean, this is a self-published series of games. They release stuff like Shattered Haven, AI War, which in my opinion is an amazing title and everyone should pick up. Titleist, which didn't sell all that well. A Valley Without Wind, which was then updated to A Valley Without Wind 2, and then Skyward Collapse. All of this was put on there without a publisher. This didn't have to go through greenlight, yet Wadget Eye stuff did. And then the Adult Swim thing can't go on without greenlight, even though that's published, and yet Arkham Game stuff isn't published. But come on, we need a set of standards. That's all I ask. Yeah. You could talk about the idea of content curation on a store until you're blue in the face, but I think everyone has to accept now that Steam is in such a powerful position that even being on Steam is advertisement in and of itself. That is marketing, which is a rather unusual situation to be in. Usually, if you want to get onto a store shelf, it's a lot easier to do that. It's actually very difficult to do it with Steam these days. Even though, of course, this is not a case of quality control. It isn't. I mean, there's plenty of bad games that keep getting on Steam, so it's not like Valve actually really cares all that much about that. At the end of the day, I just want to see a set of real standards put in place and not have these double standards and this inconsistency all the time. Make your mind up. What's okay, what isn't? Why is it that X game could get on Steam and not Y game, even though they're similar circumstances? Why is it that publishers are sometimes okay to put games on Steam and sometimes they're not okay to put games on Steam? Why is it that you can self-publish these kind of games but you can't self-publish these kind of games without greenlight? It's silly, and let's be honest, greenlight has turned into a glorified popularity contest. Not all that many people actively use greenlight without being prompted to do so. It's not even actively promoted on the front page. It's way below the fold. If you go down, you've got to scroll several times to actually even reach the greenlight section, which ends up just being a gigantic mess. It's hardly a good system to use for the user, and you're not encouraged to do it either. It's like, if you really wanted people to use greenlight, then you would give them rewards for doing so. The problem is you're not. You don't even get Steam badges or anything like that. If you want to do that, push the trading card system into this. Do something to encourage people to actively use this service so that it doesn't just become a popularity contest, because that's what it is right now. If I post a video that says greenlight this game, there's a significantly higher likelihood that it will get greenlit. It's as simple as that, because I'm pushing traffic to it. And that's the case. That's bad. Like, I shouldn't have that kind of influence. Nobody should have that kind of influence. This should be down to what actually looks good, not what is best marketed via YouTube videos and Facebook pages. If you want to greenlight this game, by the way, then I'll put a link in the description below this video. The whole Paranautical Activity thing leaves a very sour taste in my mouth. It would be a nice little victory if that ended up on Steam regardless. A new Halo game has been announced for Windows. Praise be the Emperor. No. Halo Spartan Assault will be developed by Vanguard, who are responsible for a couple of pretty good games, including Greed Corp as well as Gatling Gears. Halo Spartan Assault will be a twin-stick shooter for Windows 8 devices, which includes, of course, Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. It is a top-down action game in the style of Gatling Gears, only it will, of course, be done using the Halo style and with Halo characters. All credit to it, it looks reasonable-ish, I suppose. I don't mind twin sticks. Twin stick shooters are fairly enjoyable. But I think the last thing that PC players were really hoping for was, one, a Windows 8 exclusive, and two, a twin stick shooter for Halo, which is very strange indeed. The game will be set between the events of Halo 3 and 4, and will explore the first missions of the Spartan Ops program. The game will feature 25 missions and will be done in collaboration with 343 Industries. Now, the reason that I even talk about this to begin with is that it's a very interesting situation with Microsoft. Microsoft not only is responsible for the biggest operating system by far on PC, but is also responsible for one of the biggest consoles. And unfortunately, those two things directly come into conflict. The thing about the Xbox is that they want to sell more Xboxes, and they want to sell more games on Xbox because they get a license fee every time they do that. What they don't get is a license fee every time anybody makes a game for Windows. So they're actually in a situation where it is more often than not a bad idea, at least in their eyes, to release their Microsoft games, publish stuff like Halo, to the PC platform. In fact, we only got 2 Halo games. We got the first one, then we got the second one much, much later that was also used as an exclusive to try and push Windows Vista, which failed marvelously, I might add. And then we haven't had anything since. We didn't get Halo 3, we didn't get ODST, we didn't get Halo 4, we didn't get Halo Wars, which was an RTS of all bloody things. And now, finally, we are thrown a bone in the form of a $6.99 shooter. It's such a weird conflict of interest, isn't it, that we see Microsoft with the OS that pretty much everybody games on when it comes to Windows, and the complete unwillingness to release any of its actual games for it because they prefer that people buy an Xbox instead. It's just so strange, isn't it? Windows 8 is definitely not a system that has been getting a lot of praise from gamers, and with good reason. I mean, it's very much designed with tablet PCs. I have one Windows 8 device, and that is my Razer Edge tablet, and it works great on a tablet, and terribly for everything else. I mean, I wouldn't switch out of Windows 7. I see no reason to do that. There's a couple of games like Skulls of the Shogun that, of course, would be nice to have on PC, but they're certainly by no means a killer app, a reason to switch to Windows 8. Windows 7 works absolutely fine. Some people are still running XP, for God's sake, even though that's clearly out of date and can't support many games these days. But at the end of the day, you've got to see the unwillingness to change to an OS that doesn't really offer anything special for gamers. And frankly, 8 had so much bad publicity behind it that I don't really blame people for not switching to 8. 8 doesn't seem to offer anything to gamers. The integration of the App Store is in fact the exact opposite of what people really wanted. It doesn't increase the fidelity of games, it doesn't increase the performance of games. In fact, in many cases, quite the opposite. It actually has slightly less performance than Windows 7 right now, although I have no doubt that'll eventually change. So it's a really strange situation, but that is where we are right now. Speaking of announcements, Lionhead has teased an HD remake of Fable The Lost Chapters, i.e. the only good one. The series that has been steadily declining since the first one, which ended, of course, with Fable The Journey, a Kinect game on rails, is not exactly doing all that well. Hyped up as a game where every choice had a consequence, it actually ended up being a relatively fun action RPG with some rather puerile elements, and that was really about it, and got progressively worse from there on in until we got to the disaster that was known as Fable 3. One way or the other, it would kind of be nice to see this redone in HD, although I would rather, of course, that these guys focus on making a good Fable game, rather than remaking a good Fable game. My only hope, of course, is that they actually stick a lot of new content into this, and maybe even turn Fable into the game that was promised. Wouldn't that be cool, right? If Molyneux actually revisited all of these promises and said, oh yeah, we screwed all that up, let's do it again, shall we? Hell, if we went back into Fable and suddenly discovered that all of the promises related to Fable were put into the game, and there was new content and all sorts of things like that, I would definitely play Fable again at that point. Of course, we don't even know if this will end up on PC. It's a studio that has been working with Microsoft for the most part lately, although Fable 3 did eventually make its way to PC. Fable 2 didn't, which was very strange. Shame, really, because as short as it was, Fable 2 was actually not terrible, whereas Fable 3 most assuredly was. But we'll keep an eye on that one and see if it actually makes its way to PC. And finally, as has been happening on this show quite frequently, I'd like to let you know about a new indie bundle that's just come out. IndieRoyale.com has the new Hammerhead bundle, which is probably one of their better bundles. I've not seen too many bundles from them that can really match up to this particular level of quality. So if you head on over to indieroyale.com right now, you'll find Primordia, Pressure, Forge, Richard and Alice, as well as Gas Guzzler's Combat Carnage, and there is a hidden game which will be unlocked at some point, no doubt. So the highlights of this bundle, in my opinion, would have to be Primordia and Forge. Primordia is a game that I talked about earlier in the Greenlight section. It is an exceptional, I do mean exceptional, point-and-click game from Wadget Eyes and Wormwood. I would absolutely recommend playing it. It is beautiful. It really, really is. It's done in an older graphic style that very much reminds me of old LucasArts games and Sierra stuff and things like that. I would strongly recommend it if you're even remotely interested in point and clicks. Forge is a really nice arena PvP game. Doesn't have any real progression in it, which is actually kind of nice. You get to use classes with their full equipment and full abilities from the very start. It just had a new class added to it as well. I played it a couple of times. I did a versus with Athena. I actually enjoyed it quite a lot. If you like the World of Warcraft style of PvP with stuff like rocket jumping and wall running and things like that, then Forge should definitely be on your radar. Also a very nice looking game as well. Two other games there which are pretty decent are Pressure, which is a steampunk-esque racing game, which is pretty cool. It's got some interesting things involved in it. There are weapons on the vehicles as well, which is always nice. And then Gas Guzzlers, which is another game. It's alright. It's not the most amazing game ever, but it's a reasonably enjoyable combat racing game. So it's always nice to have that as part of an indie bundle. And then there's Richard and Alice, which I have actually never heard of whatsoever. I would love to tell you about it, but I don't know a damn thing about it. So head on over to indieroyale.com and you'll be able to pick up that bundle, and for the most part it would appear that these games do have Steam keys, with the exception of Richard and Alice and Gas Guzzlers, neither of which have currently been greenlit as of yet. Alright folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I would like to give you your OC Remix track of the day. It's not mine, it's yours now. Here, you can take it. Here's something new, something very, very new from OC Remix. This is in fact their latest remix and has been done by a remixer called Mediocre. This is his debut remix on OCRemix.com, so I always like to support the new artists rather than just the same guys over and over again. And he actually remixed the track from Final Fantasy XII, which is not exactly a game that gets a huge amount of remixes. Now, this is a remix of the track The Tomb of Wraithwall, and it's got some really interesting atonal percussion going on it, which actually gives it this rather crazy, spooky feel, but it's also got a nice beat behind it as well. Very unusual. It's pretty cool, and I like that. It's like, he didn't go too far with the weirdness to the point where it's unlistenable. It's actually still a nice track to listen to, but it's definitely a different spin on a track from that particular game. So you can download that in the description below this video. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.